No one in the basketball world was completely ready for what transpired within the Team USA organization. Midway through the competition, a head coach vanished from the sidelines without providing a convincing public explanation. Almost overnight, a new voice took control, and in a matter of hours, Caitlin Clark transformed from a bench player to the offense's main driver. Fans took notice right away. The interim coach at the core of it all has now stated exactly what happened and what this staff had been doing to Clark behind closed doors, which caused the internet to go crazy. They didn't want to reveal the whole tale. You must return to the beginning of this moment in order to comprehend why it struck so deeply. Caitlin Clark initially put on her sneakers as a member of the USA basketball women's senior national team during a training camp in Durham, North Carolina, in December. This was more than a routine exercise. It was the first clear indication of her destiny in the red, white, and blue. Kara Lawson, the head coach, had recently been officially chosen to oversee the program until the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. Stephanie White, the head coach of the Indiana Fever, Natalie Nassi, the coach of the Golden State Volley, and Nate Tibbitz, the head coach of the Phoenix Mercury, were among her assistants. A laden bench, on paper. In reality, this configuration would subtly lead to one of the most talked-about plots of the qualifying run. At that camp in December, Clark was doing everything correctly behind closed doors. After a terrible 2025 WNBA season in which she played in just 13 games due to a string of lower body injuries that prevented one of the most explosive players in the sport from playing basketball for almost a whole year, she was working with medical staff, working with development coaches, and rebuilding her body. The WNBA All-Star Game had been missed by her. The playoffs had eluded her. Without her, she had watched from the sidelines while the Indiana Fever advanced far in the postseason. Nevertheless, Clark appeared to be herself once more when the cameras rolled at that Durham camp, locked in, energized, and prepared. The anxiety that was subtly growing over how she would be utilized once the game started was something that the cameras were unable to properly capture. In March 2026, Puerto Rico was victorious in the FIA Women's World Cup qualification round. After winning the American Cup the previous summer, Team USA had already secured a spot in the World Cup in Germany. Thus, in a sense, these 5 qualifying matches in San Juan were really formalities. Formality notwithstanding, the stakes seemed very high because this was the senior national team debut for Paige Bueckers, Angel Reese, and Caitlin Clark. Together, 3 of the most well-known figures in women's basketball are making their debut on the global scene. A huge number of fans turned up. The whole basketball world was watching Lawson's use of her new generation of stars on social media. Everyone was completely taken aback by what happened in the first 2 games. Lawson arrived with a mindset that she candidly referred to as a fact-finding trip. She was using a system where 5 players left and 5 returned on a virtually mechanical schedule, akin to hockey shifts, and she was heavily rotating all 12 players on the roster. Instead of the starting 5, Clark was assigned to the second unit. She was sharing bench time with Monique Billings, Ryan Howard, Kelsey Plum, and Kiki Iriafin. Game after game, the season starting lineup of Chelsea Gray, Jackie Young, Kalia Copper, Durka Kahambi, and a rotating front court was solidified as the opening unit. Questions were immediately raised by the optics. For her part, Clark managed it with the poise of someone who was familiar with the task. She came off the bench in the first game against Segal and was outstanding. With 17 points and 12 assists, the USA's opening performance broke international records. In just 1 quarter, she established the offensive tone for the entire squad. Following the event, Lawson acknowledged it, describing Clark as one of the world's most dynamic playmakers and applauding how she instantly increased the tempo and effectiveness of everything around her. Clark stayed in the second unit despite this. The rotation-heavy approach was maintained for the second game versus Puerto Rico. In a convincing victory, Clark delivered once more, contributing 12 points and 5 assists. The figures were exceptional. There was no denying the effect. However, the surrounding construction remained unaltered. Supporters were irritated. It was boiling over on social media. People started repeatedly posing the same query. Why? Even though Clark was undoubtedly the most explosive player on the floor, she was prevented from starting and from fully utilizing the offensive system. The coach then departed. At this point, the narrative takes a dramatic turn that no one could have predicted. Lawson had always intended to go back to Duke. Even before the qualifying tournament began, Her dual responsibilities of coaching the Blue Devils in the NCAA tournament had received criticism. Lawson left the sidelines when Duke's schedule required her to return, and Nate Tibbitz, the head coach of the Phoenix Mercury, took over in the final games. The changeover was presented as planned and formal. However, what transpired on the court afterwards revealed a very different narrative. Tibbitz entered the room and changed the philosophy almost instantly. The inflexible 5-in, 5-out rotation has vanished. Regardless of what the lineup combinations were actually delivering, the fixed hierarchy that kept the same veterans in the starting five was no longer in place. It was replaced by something that resembled merit-based basketball far more. And the first person to profit was Caitlin Clark. The initial five of Team USA struggled right away in the match against Italy. The offense was totally stalled after 3 minutes. Italy had blocked passing lanes, crowded the paint, and challenged the Americans to beat them. It was unbreakable by the initial unit. Tibbitz then called number 22 while glancing along the bench. Clark entered the game at 646 of the first quarter. Real-time viewers described what transpired as nothing less than a takeover. Team USA scored 23 points in around 6.5 minutes while Clark was leading the offense. The starters had scored 5 points in the 3 minutes prior to her. To put it in perspective, not only does the math favor Clark, but it calls out her name. The moment she touched the ball, the geometry of the court changed. Prior to her appearance, Italy's defense was at ease and composed, but now they were rushing to cover ground they hadn't anticipated. That day, Clark ended with 12 points and 5 assists, helping Team USA win 93-59. However, this is what set Tibbitz apart and was quickly embraced by both fans and pundits. Not only did he make the lineup adjustments, but he also discussed them with a candor that is actually uncommon for coaches working in professional settings where every public comment is scrutinized. Tibbitz admitted that the earlier strategy had not been the best when standing at the podium. Although he didn't openly criticize Lawson, he made it very evident that the team's finest playmakers should be the focal point of the offense. The group gave its best performance, he stressed. The media recognized the importance of what he was saying when there was clarity, players understood their roles, and the offensive scheme was designed to maximize the best players on the team rather than distribute minutes fairly. This was effectively a coach confirming what the box scores had been indicating for days, that Clark's powers had not been unlocked by the system in place prior to his arrival. He didn't shout it. Even though he didn't make it a story, it still made headlines. The following chapter began with a match against New Zealand. Tibbitz started Clark this time. She was out there from tip-off with Chelsea Gray, Kelsey Plum, Monique Billings, and Dirkika Hamby for the first time in the competition. The outcome was precisely what those advocating for this reform had anticipated. 101-46, Team USA crushed New Zealand. With confidence and control, Clark orchestrated from the top of the key, scoring 14 points on effective shooting, making flawless free throws, and providing a team-high 6 assists in just 23 minutes. The offense advanced more quickly. The ball found players who were free. The spacing was precisely what was required. For the first time in the competition, Clark appeared totally at ease in a role that suited her true ability. Even casual watchers were noting on how drastically different it was from the first 2 games. It went beyond simply switching up the lineup. When this squad stopped being hesitant about giving its greatest players complete freedom, it made a statement about what it could become. That was not the end of it. Tibbitz made another play later in the competition that completely ignited social media. He positioned Paige Buchers and Clark in the backcourt. For months, Pyrian supporters had been speculating about the possibility of 2 of their generation's most talented playmakers playing together. They both have the ability to create from any location, shoot from 30 feet out, and recognize passes that most players would never even consider. An offensive clinic was the outcome. The math of defending becomes almost impossible when those 2 are on the court together. On every possession, open shooters appear. Driving lanes automatically open. When the offensive strategy is based on less dynamic ball handlers, the paint becomes accessible in ways that it just isn't. It was the type of one-time court evidence that provides conclusive answers to questions, not through discussion, but via outcomes. Additionally, Tibbitz handled that pairing as a valid weapon rather than treating it as a curiosity. Now, it's crucial to be clear about something that might be overlooked in the whirlwind of social media rumors and fan indignation. There was no plot against Caitlin Clark in Kara Lawson's initial plan. Lawson has always made it clear that the purpose of these qualifying games was to gather information. Her goal was to assess various lineups, determine which players complemented certain lineups, and set the groundwork for what Team USA will look like in preparation for the 2028 Olympics and the World Cup in Berlin. Arriving from their various WNBA off-season seasons and arriving without any regular games. It makes sense to rotate everyone and observe how the pieces fit together. In actuality, it's how you responsibly develop a software over time. Even when Lawson rotated Clark around the second unit, she consistently complimented her and made it apparent that she recognized the type of player she was working with. However, the outcomes on the ground revealed a compelling narrative. And Tibbitz made the decision that the evidence indicated while operating in a condensed time frame with less need for evaluation and more need for victory. That is the conflict that is at the core of this whole circumstance. One of the two respectable coaching philosophies provided Clark with less freedom than she deserved. The fan response to all of this developed into a plot that was nearly as extensive as the games themselves. Social media erupted with suspicions that the coaching staff was purposefully restricting Clark's effect when Lawson first kept him in the second unit, either out of envy, favoritism toward veterans, or some internal power struggle that no one was fully addressing publicly. Fans analyzed Clark's body language and facial expressions frame by frame as photos of her standing close to her Indiana Fever head coach, Stephanie White, who was working as an assistant for Team USA, went viral. Viewers were certain they could detect a trace of strain in those exchanges. Comments rushed in, implying that White and Clark still had unresolved issues from their time together with the Fever. According to reports, White had publicly framed Kelsey Mitchell as the team's top offensive priority, which infuriated some Clark supporters. It is impossible to confirm from the outside whether any of that had anything to do with what was taking place on the Puerto Rican court, but the impression was genuine. Furthermore, in the era of social media, perception has a tendency to become its own form of proof for those who are already inclined to accept it. Before any member of the team ever spoke, the story began to take shape. There was a discrepancy between how Clark was being used and how she could have been used from the beginning, as Tibbitz affirmed both in his remarks at the podium and in his actual lineup choices. He made no accusations against anyone. He acknowledged the change, gave his explanation, and let the scoreboard speak for itself without framing it as dysfunction. In the competition, Team USA went 5-0. Throughout the qualifying run, Clark led the team in assists, recorded an incredible +80+-, and made 7 of 13 three-pointers in each of the 5 games. After missing 8 months due to injury, she returned to competitive basketball, and right away, she appeared to be the team's most complete two-way initiator. The figures do not represent a tiny sample anomaly. They are a persistent battle against physically disciplined defenses that lasts the entirety of an international competition. She took over games after coming off the bench. Blowouts were initiated and coordinated by her. She has exceptional timing when running pick and roll. For the majority of the prior WNBA season, she was unable to drive to the rim due to an injury. And she accomplished all of this while publicly saying all the right things, adopting a team-first mindset, expressing sincere appreciation for the chance, and refusing to make any of this about herself, despite the fact that the entire discourse revolved around her. Beneath all of this, there is a larger question that the basketball community will be thinking about for months. Berlin will host the 2026 FIA Women's World Cup in September. Kara Lawson will return to the sidelines. The decisions will be made by the coaching staff that was in place prior to Tibbitz taking over. And it will be crucial to consider how Caitlin Clark is used, whether or not she starts, how many minutes she plays, and whether the offense is designed to make the most of her or to balance the egos and experience of a team full of outstanding veterans. Because when Clark is given more authority, this squad resembles what Tibbitz briefly demonstrated. It appears to be a 6-minute run of 23 points. It appears to be a demolition of 101-46. Because the threat is coming from all directions at once, it appears to be an offense that no defense in the world can comfortably prepare for. The choice of lineup is not the only factor in the coaching selection. It comes down to what this team's true ceiling is. And given everything that has transpired in Puerto Rico thus far, that ceiling appears to be far higher with Clark in the middle of it than anywhere near its edge. The amazing thing about Clark's behavior during all of this is that she never once made it about herself in public. She discussed adaptability, learning, and the difficulty of immediately establishing rapport in a team setting when questioned about the rotation early in the competition. "You aren't the star at the USA basketball level," she said. You are a part of something greater. With a track record of prioritizing the team in every setting she has ever played in, she said all of that with total honesty. Then, since the argument wasn't coming from her mouth, she went out and presented figures that made the question of her role impossible to ignore. Every night, it came from the scoreboard. It is precisely this combination of modesty and unquestionable performance that makes the scene so captivating to observe. She gave the coaches no reason to claim that she was challenging. There are no misinterpreted quotes. Beyond what fans were projecting onto her, there was no body language to examine. She did nothing but play. Additionally, each time she played, the squad improved in ways that were obvious, quantifiable, and difficult to ignore. The discourse surrounding women's basketball in the U.S. has drastically changed. The first time Clark, Rhee, and Boer appear together on a global stage is more than just a promotional event. The sport is undergoing a generational transition in real time. The coaches are aware of this. The federation is aware of this. Both the sponsorship landscape and the broadcasting partners are aware of this. The question is whether USA Basketball's procedures and institutions will properly adjust to the needs of this generation of players, or if outdated hierarchies will impede what is clearly inevitable. In Puerto Rico, Tibbitz offered everyone a peek of that future. A 5-0 record, a few lineup changes, public remarks about building around elite talent, and a Clark stat line that resembled something from a video game. That's the blueprint. The whole world of women's basketball will be eagerly watching to see if Lawson takes it up when she returns to the sidelines in Berlin. And if she doesn't, the discussion that broke out in Puerto Rico will seem quiet in contrast if Clark attends the World Cup and is once more forced into a role that restricts her genuine abilities because everyone has already seen what is possible. And it's quite difficult to look after you've seen it.